Hey everyone, thanks for tuning in again. Second one of the day. I'm Yossi Goslin, NBA salary cap analyst. You can find all my content on YouTube, Spotify, and Apple Podcast. You can follow me on Twitter and Blue Sky. All of that all under my name, Yossi Goslin. You can also subscribe to my newsletter, Third Apron on Substack, and see all my salary cap information on capsheets.com. And today I'm going to be discussing the Atlanta Hawks and their upcoming offseason. And joining me today to discuss one of the best guys covering the Hawks, Brad Rowland, host of Locked on Hawks. Brad, how are you doing today?
I'm doing well. Appreciate you having me on.
Of course. So, yeah, you've had a lot of good stuff over the past week since the Hawks got eliminated, as far as the developments in the front office, what might happen there, and also the just Trae Young's future, like whether they want to extend him versus a trade. So we'll get into that. Let's start with the front office situation first. Just kind of like a little bit what led up to it, what might be next, who might come in, what exactly the Hawks might be looking for. So whoever's listening, I suggest you all go back, listen to some of his work on Locked on Hawks this week. You can hear a lot of good context there. But just from like an outsider kind of seeing things over the past few years, here's kind of like my view of kind of what's happened since 2021, where they had that Eastern Conference Finals run, which in hindsight, maybe not exactly like a great progression for them, kind of raised expectations pretty quickly, maybe led to some of the decisions that ended up putting them into their draft pick hole that they got in, like particularly the DeJounte trade, trading 2 firsts, unprotected in 1 swap. And now, from a lot of the reporting that's coming out, seems like there were maybe a lot of voices in the room that may have led to that. So a lot of people like myself were a little surprised that the Hawks fired Landry Fields, especially considering I think they've done a really good job this year, especially considering where they were at the end of the getting eliminated from the playoffs. Not having their picks and before the DeJounte trade, I think they've recovered pretty nicely. But ultimately, it feels to me that the Hawks just, they want to stabilize the front office a little bit, maybe bring in a guy that could avoid that kind of situation again and just kind of, I guess, consolidate the direction, if that makes sense. So, but also they got to stay competitive over these next 2 years because they still owe picks to the Spurs. So, I mean, just like broadly speaking, what would you make of that assessment?
Yeah, I think it's quite reasonable, and it's funny when you make a conference finals run as an organization that's just not really ever, not never done that, but it's not the norm, right? So it's hard to say that it's like was bad for the development curve, but because they've made it further than they've really ever made it since they got to Atlanta, they've never won more games in the conference finals than they did in 2021, which is kind of funny. But they did kind of speed up even before that. They, not to go way down the rabbit hole, but they were in this rebuild. They were taking their time and they sped up even to get to that point. They went out and got Bogdanovich and Danilo Gallinari and Clint Capella faster than people thought that they probably should, for instance. And they kind of did that again when they got there. To your point, like the first probably false step after that conference finals run was that they just kind of brought the band back together. Like they didn't do anything to improve. I think they thought that they had arrived. I don't know who they is. This from organization ownership on down. Like they were like, all right, we're here, we did it. And they all said, I mean, dating back to Travis Schlenk, who was the GM at the time, and the owner, they were all like, we didn't understand how much better we needed to be, basically, and they just kind of ran it back, and that didn't work, obviously, and that leads to desperation. Maybe is the right word. I don't know if that's what you ever want to be, but that's kind of where they were, I think, when they went and traded for DeJounte Murray, and that was pretty much failed immediately, like it never worked. And the theory of it kind of was mixed, but at least you understood kind of what they were trying to do. But they kind of overpaid in the trade, and then the partnership between Murray and Young just didn't work at all. So fast forward to all of that, like I was also a little bit surprised about Landry Fields being fired. I think the league was surprised. I think the people around the Hawks were surprised. That was reported out there by me and other. I think Mark Stein said the same thing. Brian Windhorst. Like there were some surprises within the team that they fired Landry when they kind of did that because you're right. Like it's been a mixed record for Landry Fields. Like there's all this nuance as well about like what was Landry Fields and what wasn't. Like there's always the behind the scenes scuttlebutt, and I have said multiple times on my shows that Landry was the GM, was the lead executive, but the feeling has been the whole time that he wasn't like the only voice. Like he was not the power level that some other GMs have, for example. A lot of voices in that organization. Some of that's ownership, a very active owner. It's been reported multiple times that the owner's son, who's the alternate governor, is involved in the conversations, voices up and down the organization. So it's a little bit odd the timing because they did. For me, it's kind of funny. I said that all year long. If you kind of grade on an appropriate curve for what they were supposed to be this season, they didn't have a bad year at all. They had a pretty encouraging season while going young and kind of taking their time and resetting a little bit. And to have your GM be fired 2 years after he was hired when the results weren't disastrous is kind of not what you would usually see. But the messaging has been, as we kind of spin it forward, that I think Wrestler, even in his announcement, the owner basically was pointing to not saying that he wanted a big name, but that's the feeling that I'm getting, that everyone's kind of getting. Like he'd like a big name, established executive that they haven't had. Whether that person exists or not is actually up for debate. I'm not sure that person is going to come to Atlanta. And maybe they end up with just giving the job to Ansi Salah, who they already promoted to GM. But yeah, it's been a mixed record, and I think it comes down. If you want to go back to what you said is perfectly accurate. Like they got a little bit over their skis, tried to make up for that by going and getting DeJounte Murray to try to win now, and they did pivot very well. They pivoted very well. Dyson Daniels, that trade was great execution, but also they're still in that like funny middle where if you don't get too deep into the weeds, you would say, look, this is a team that just won 40 games, and they're kind of the play-in poster child in some respects. And they have a young core that makes it a lot more optimistic than that makes it sound. But if you wanted to be cynical and just say, look, the Hawks are like a 40-win team every year, that isn't wrong. And I think they don't want to be there, obviously.
I agree, but at the same time, I know a lot of people might not be able to see it right now, but just, yeah, considering again where they were after getting eliminated last year versus now, it's like a complete 180. I wrote extensively about the Dyson Daniels trade on Third Apron, and like that trade really bought them some time as far as this draft picks holder in, but they also got exactly the player they were looking for in DeJounte Murray originally, and even better, if anything, much better fit. So, yeah, they really turned things around. As far as like their path in 2020, when they did those moves, I didn't really see how it would help that much more, just because they're mostly just adding depth pieces, but it worked. But also when you take a step back, now we can see, there's a lot of injuries on both sides of the conference that helped that kind of played into what a lot of the results were. Not so much for the Hawks, I guess mostly benefiting the Bucks. I think they played like a healthy Knicks and Sixers team. Okay, so yeah, that wasn't really the case with them, but still a weird year. And yeah, so maybe, yeah, it kind of led to the decision to like make another step after they got bounced out of the first round the year after. But it seems like as far as the surprise, I would say the front officing has improved since the DeJounte trade, but I kind of respect organizationally if they just, by wanting to do this move anyways, just to try to really get rid of this like multiple voices thing, which seems to be in a lot of the reporting, and just really try to stabilize things. So they'll do the search. We'll see who they end up bringing in, but I'm pretty optimistic at this point. Like really one of the bigger turnarounds. A lot of teams have over leveraged their draft picks. The Hawks did not too much in like standards from what other teams have done, but they've already recovered pretty nicely from it.
The only fear there, not to cut you off, the only fear there is that when you're doing the patient thing and you're retooling, and then you make an executive firing, it almost announces that you don't want to be patient anymore, which is a little bit scary when you have an owner who has a record of being a little bit impatient. So that's the only fear, I think. I'm with you 100%. Like they've been on the track that you want to be on. It's just whether they've might step out of that now and get more over their skis again. But hopefully not if you're a Hawks fan.
Right. So let's get into the actual offseason then. And I think the place to start is Trae Young. Very interesting situation for him. So just looking at his contract situation, I would say probably the biggest priority for the Hawks to navigate. They also have the Dyson Daniels extension, which we'll get into. But I would say Trae Young is just like a little bit more paramount at the moment. So he's got 1 year on his deal before he's got a player option and he could technically opt out, become a free agent. And there is some uncertainty about what can happen next. Now, you've done a good job covering this, gathering intel reports about the situation. I remember right after the trade deadline, Chris Haynes posted about, he was like on NBA TV saying, oh, Trae Young wants to win. And it kind of sounded to me like maybe he's implying he might ask for a trade or something like that. But now there's reports that an extension is very much possible. And you've made the point that that Trae is more valuable to the Hawks right now than as a trade chip. And I think I agree with that. Like, I'd even say Trae's probably more valuable to the Hawks right now as a player than maybe any other team. The Hawks, they've been committed to working around his limitations and making everything work. And I just struggle to identify, like, you could pick some teams out there that make sense for him, but I struggle to identify teams that would give up like a haul that makes trading him right now worth it. And the Hawks cannot undersell him. Like, I think I'd rather ride out the Trae era under a good contract than just get rid of him just because he's got these limitations that are, hard to work around. But yeah, so I mean, yeah, I just feel like the Hawks are just better off extending him at something pretty reasonable than just even trying to find out what type of offers might be out there.
Yeah, I mean, you just laid it out. Like, that's my broad thought is that he is a limited player in some respects. I think it's almost gone too far the other direction on Trae Young, where he's now pretty clearly underrated to me. Like, there's a point in his career where that would have surprised me because he is, a big stats, small guard. Like, that kind of player is not usually like my cup of tea, honestly. And I found those guys to be overrated a lot of the time. And Trae Young, you could argue 4 years ago, might have been overrated when he was getting involved in top 10 player conversations and all those things. And I'm not sure he's that. But he's also better than people think he is now, it seems like. It seems like he's like an afterthought. And he's, I see some of these player rankings where he's in the 30s and 40s. And I'm like, that seems a little bit odd to me for a guy in the middle of his prime. But you're right. I mean, there's this combination of the Hawks have kind of built around him, not entirely because of him, but they've insulated him pretty well with what they've done as a team building exercise with all these young wings, two-way players. That's what you would want around Trae Young. And also, all of their other core pieces, like right now anyway, maybe not in 3 years, but right now, they all kind of need the number one guy to make it all work. Like, they don't really have another number one offensive creator in the pipeline. I like Jalen Johnson a lot. I like Dyson Daniels a lot. Zachary Shea. None of those guys are probably a number one option offensively, like as a creator for other people in particular. And Trae obviously does that. So there's that side of it, the basketball side. And then there is the transactional side where part of the reason I'm saying Trae Young is underrated is that you're 100% right. From what I've heard, there is no Godfather offer available for Trae Young. If they could get 4 first-round picks, like one of those crazy full draft hauls that we've seen traded in the last few years, like you'd have to consider that. But that offer's not coming. That offer doesn't exist for Trae Young. So if your options are to try to build with this guy, or to sell him for a pick or two, and like suddenly be turning around and trying to get the same kind of player Trae Young already is, which is what they would do. Like, the Hawks are not going to suddenly pivot to a really hard rebuild if you trade Trae Young. And you need an offensive initiator. So you just be turning around and trying to replicate what Trae Young already is for you. So that doesn't mean you give him a blank check. You can argue about whether he should get the max. Like, he probably shouldn't get the full max in an extension this summer, if you ask me. It's a lot of money for him.
I agree. So
27 season.
Yeah. So let's get into what that could look like. But I agree with you that Trae Young has become underrated. And I feel like as a cap guy, a lot of that type of discourse kind of stems on a player's contract. I think the conversation on Trae Young would be a lot different if he wasn't making a full max right now. And yeah, I don't really envision a max being out there. You look at some of the teams he's been linked to in the past, like Lakers, Spurs, they've got their guards now. The Heat, I mean, they're paying Tyler Hero half that amount. I think they're comfortable with that. I'm not sure that's out there, so he might need to compromise a bit. And I do feel both sides really need each other right now. So you mentioned the Jalen Brunson situation, which is something I've thought about. His extension, he took a sub-max, significantly below the max extension, paying him in the mid-30s. And I don't think that's something that front offices are going to hold like other guards to that are like borderline all-NBA players. And in Trae's case, I don't think it's going to be like, hey, you're not as good as Jalen Brunson, so we're going to only offer you less than that. But I think just if it does make some sort of impact, it's that Trae probably for sure doesn't get like a full max. So I'm looking at what that is, his full max, assuming he doesn't get the super max. It starts in the low 50 million range and then ends up averaging 60. So it ends up in like the high 60s. What I've kind of had in the back of my mind, maybe he signs an extension where he's kind of making around the same he's doing right now, maybe tops out in the low to high 50s, maybe just like stays under 60. So you're talking like instead of a 30% max, something like 27, 28, something like that. You're still above the 25%. And that would be, even if that feels like a lot, that's still a great percentage in a rising cap environment. So I think that could be something where they kind of settle on just something slightly below the max, and that would come a long way towards sustaining this group they have, where they have Jalen Johnson. They'll be able to afford Dyson Daniels on his next deal. And they still have a couple years of Ricochet on his rookie deal. So yeah, this would help build like a more sustainable window for like the next 3-4 years at least.
Yeah, I don't think that, I've used the Brunson example just because it's a recent one, but it's not the same situation, as people probably know. Like, Brunson wasn't coming off a full max the way that Trae Young is. He was limited what he could sign at that very moment. He could wait a year. There was this whole discussion about that, the whole thing with Brunson where, but yeah, I think, Trae makes about 46 million next year in his final guaranteed season. If you can hang around that area, yeah, something like 4,180 or something like that as a full deal versus 4,240 or whatever he's actually able to sign, 230, 240. That would be a reasonable range. Or you can also go a little bit shorter if you wanted to. Like if you can get him to take 3 years, that'd probably be better for a guy who's going to be 31 by the end. If you do a 4-year deal and a small guard, and that could be a little bit tricky. But I think that you never know till you get in the room. But I think there is probably a way to get the point across to Trae, who just changed agents about a year ago as well. That's a relevant data point in this. That like, hey, we're going to pay you as much or more than anybody else is going to be able to pay you, or probably going to pay you. But we don't want to go to the point where we're going to hurt our team building ability. And I think you can sell Trae Young on the fact that we want to be able to keep the rest of our guys. And Trae Young is bought into guys like Dyson Daniels and Ricochet and Jalen Johnson. There's a little bit of a middle ground there, which is not usually the case. It's hard to negotiate with star players. Like, usually there's not really a negotiation. It's like you get the most you can get or you don't offer it. And Trae's in that middle where I just said he's underrated, but he isn't at the point where you have to give him the absolute most you can give him right now all the time. That's how you end up with a bad contract at the end. Like, even without a fall off, I don't think you want to be paying Trae Young $70 million in his age 31 season.
Yeah,
maybe he's worth that, but I kind of doubt that he is. So there is a middle ground there, and I think the Hawks, whoever this person is negotiating that contract, they're probably the number one charge going into the offseason. It's like, can you get Trae Young to agree to what you would call a reasonable extension, even if it's going to be a lot of money for him?
Yeah. And yeah, that's just been the trend the past 5-6 years since COVID, where the cap stalled. So it made more sense for players to extend. That you were making as much as you would have gotten in free agency with a max deal. And teams have just been handing them out, very little negotiation. And I kind of feel like that might be about to end. This is something that Brian Windhorst he's been pounding the drum on this, that there's probably going to be a lot more negotiation now as far as like as what you pay, like, a borderline all NBA guy or like a lower tier all-star guy. Because yeah, I mean, I wrote about De'Aaron Fox, for example, with the Spurs. It seems like they might just pay him the max, but when you look at historically, Players getting a second max, who've only had like one All-NBA, one All-Star appearance. Not a great history there. Trae Young's a little more. He's done a lot more than that. He's gotten like more accomplishments than that. But yeah, still not like I wouldn't say probably wouldn't project to be such a high value. So if you could just get something slightly below, I think everyone's happy and you could continue this. And then maybe down the line, if things do change, probably a little easier to trade him than he is now on a full max deal. So yeah, I think we're kind of in agreement that that's probably where it ends up at the end. But yeah, so then the other extension candidate, Dyson Daniels, finished second in Defensive Player of the Year, I think, and just won Most Improved Player last year. And so, yeah, I mean, I'll just throw it out to you. Have you had any thoughts about what an extension for him could look like?
Yes, I think it's going to be, again, not to go back to this one more time, but the uncertainty with the front office makes intel a little bit harder because you don't know who's making the decision on the Hawks side. But, I've been looking at it for 6 months now, probably, about like what comparisons are and all of that. Defense doesn't always get you paid in the way offense does. For better or worse, that's the history of it. It's not always the case, but it can be a little bit harder to negotiate these deals where it's not a max offer. He's a defense-first player, but he is a super young guy with a lot of pedigree. Like Dyson Daniels, I know he was kind of toiling in New Orleans, but he was a mid-lottery pick. Like he's not coming out of nowhere. This is an established player, and I say that in part because I think the most recent comparison that I've been using is Jalen Suggs. And Jalen Suggs got 5 for 150 a year ago in a lower cap environment. And I'm not saying Dyson needs to get more than that, but if you're Dyson's representatives, you have to come to the table with that as a primary comparison. It's the most similar one that I can find. They're very similar players. Suggs a little bit more proven as a shooter, but they're both defense-first guys drafted in the lottery who had breakouts in their third seasons for their teams. Like it's a pretty logical comparison point.
Yeah.
And if you just do the inflation for the cap, it's even more than $30 million a year in this environment going in. So I'd probably start there if I was Dyson's team. I don't know if the Hawks are going to go that high, but if the deal gets done, like I've been thinking, it's going to be $25 million a year or more. I don't see how it couldn't be, unless Dyson just really wants to sign an extension. Because look, there is the security aspect, the real life dollars, and occasionally people that do what we do, like you get lost in like this is still real money and real security, lifetime changing money. But even if you go back 2 years ago, I mean, is he going to take less than someone like Jaden McDaniels or Devin Vassell got 2 years ago when he's more proven than those guys were 2 years ago? Like you just said, he just won Most Improved Player and was number 2 in Defensive Player of the Year. Like, and those guys got $26 million a year in a lower cap environment. So something in the 25-30 range would be my guess. If it gets done, the Hawks love him, for obvious reasons. So I think it will get done. I just honestly, I'm more curious than anything because the uncertainty with the Hawks side is so glaring that it's hard to kind of lay out. But the comparison points are pretty clearly in that 30-ish million range.
Yeah, Jalen Suggs is, I think, the exact comp a lot of people are looking at. And I've really dissected the situations where when Jalen Suggs got his contract, he shot the hell out of the ball in his third season, and he held it up this year, even though he didn't play too much. I'm not sure if he held it up to like the exact rate he was doing, but I know he was still like playing really well offensively. The magic really fell off once he got injured. Dyson, he got his shot a little more respectable. He's not going to be like a primary offensive guy, but like now he's got to be respected. But I do think the offensive factor is going to be important for what his deal would be. So I would say like as a baseline, yeah, whatever, like the same deal Jalen Suggs got plus just a little more to adjust for the inflation of the cap going up 10%. That seems like a very logical endpoint for how this might go. A lot of listeners might think, hey, like we should probably be worth a lot more than that. Maybe like 35 plus. I could understand that. That would definitely that would take like a strong belief within the Hawks organization that he is going to make like another significant offensive leap where he can maybe be like a true secondary, like offensive threat. Thankfully the Hawks don't need him to be that right now. but that would help a lot towards that. So I would say, yeah, the floor is probably what Jalen is getting, maybe like Trey Murphy, who's making a little less, like 28 a year. But just for like, just kind of comparison's sake, yeah, probably more so the Jalen Suggs deal. And I do think it's worth noting, if there's something the Hawks front office deserves a lot of credit for, is negotiating with their players. I think they got an excellent deal with Jalen Johnson. I would say, based on what he's done this year, he's probably worth more than that. $30 million a year flat, that's going to age really well. Getting Okongwu on basically the mid-level exception, excellent deal. So yeah, I wouldn't expect them to do anything, to like, give him something exorbitant to Dyson Daniels. I would say, they'll probably, obviously slightly different front office now. We'll see what happens, but I probably would expect they kind of continue to hold the same lines that they've been holding these past years.
Yeah, they've only given out one iffy extension in this entire era, and it was the DeAndre Hunter one.
Oh,
well, no, Collins was an extension. That was a re-sign as a free agent. That was and they should have squeezed him more than they did, which I said at the time. It was a weird negotiation. They had all the leverage and they didn't use it. It was odd. But the only year ahead extension that was a little bit shaky was the Hunter deal, and even then they got out of it by the end. A year before that, they couldn't move that deal. It was seen as a negative, and then Hunter decided to have a good season, so they got off it. But yeah, Okongwu, Jalen Johnson, pretty good data points, and not paying Saddiq Bey. They could have paid Saddiq Bey, and they didn't. They drew a line in the sand there, and were smart to do so. So different people for sure, but I think there is a line though for Dyson. I mean, as much as I like him, he's a really good player. I wouldn't go to 40. You know what I mean? I wouldn't be giving the 24% of the cap or whatever it was going to be moving forward. So because ultimately, how do I say this? I think that there is not that much of a risk of Dyson blowing up more and getting the max in free agency a year from now. Like if he does that, that is a good problem to have if you're the Hawks. So you should at least negotiate fairly firmly, because I don't really think Dyson's the kind of player that's going to suddenly command the max. So there's a little bit of wiggle room there, but being smart and kind of using your leverage to your advantage is probably smart there.
Yeah, I'm with you there. I would guess most likely they come to an agreement. Probably one of those that goes down to the eve of the start of the regular season, because usually only the max deals get done early. This one's going to be a negotiation. There could be incentives. There could be a lot of bells and whistles into this one. Probably go up to the last minute. So, but I would expect it gets done at the end. But yeah, so last thing, just general roster stuff. So I'm looking at their cap sheet. Whoever's watching, you can view their cap sheets on capsheets.com. So for the first time in a couple of years, the Tax aren't like right up against the tax or needing to do a John Collins type salary dump to get below it. They're entering the offseason. I got them about $32 million below the tax. That's assuming they also keep the Kings pick, which they probably will. Very unlikely the Kings jump into the top 4. That would be unprecedented at 13. And so they've got a lot of flexibility, but they already have most of the team pretty set. They've got their starters set. They could use the full mid-level to fill out the bench, but they already have a lot of the bench already filled out. So with that flexibility, if they want to, they could try to go after someone with the full mid-level. They got bird rights to several free agents like Capella, LeVert, Larry Nance. Obviously, what they do in the draft could impact what they do to fill out the rest of the roster. But they have some flexibility to just bring back their guys, run it back for the most part, and even do some sort of, not like super imbalanced trade, but they can increase payroll in a trade if they're able to bring in like a consolidate a little bit, bring in a more impactful guy. Just Jenny, any general thoughts on how you could see their offseason playing out?
I think they are going to be in an adding mode. Not to go back to it, but I think the decision by Ressler to change the front office was a bit of a signal that they want to be aggressive to some degree to try to win more in the short term. That could be dangerous, but that's kind of the feeling I'm getting, is that they want to win more. And that means adding. Now, obviously, they have a team that is prime for some internal development. A lot of young players, they're very young, but you still need to get better in some other spots. You mentioned the full mid-level. They've had access to parts of it in recent past and haven't used it at all. Basically, they've been sitting on their hands with that ability. They have that. They have probably not going to use it, but they have this DeJounte Murray trade exception that's 25-ish million that they want to even get a little bit more creative. And part of the appeal of the DeAndre Hunter trade when they did it was to create flexibility for this summer to do some other stuff because they're not up against the tax, to your point. So I think a lot of it's going to be running it back, but it will not surprise me. I'm kind of expecting them to add at least one real player. And when I say that, I mean like a mid-level exception or better kind of player to this team.
Okay.
A top 7 guy, only because I think they want to win now.
Okay, because I was gonna ask if you could clarify, like if that just meant adding to exactly what they've got, or maybe upgrading, like their top 5 guys. Which, yeah, they do have the flexibility to do that. They've got some picks. Earlier this morning, I had my Giannis stream about teams. We went through, me and Sam Quinn went through every single team, and we consider the Hawks like an actual dark horse if they really wanted to get into it, like a Jalen Johnson and pick space package. Probably got to include one other of like Dyson or Zachary Risa to make it happen. But that's as far as I'll go. Generally speaking, if the Hawks wanted to do something that aggressive, they might not have the best package, but I could see them getting into the mix. I mean, do you have any like pie in the sky possibilities you think are even reasonable, or you think it's not really going to happen?
Giannis is one where you have to make the call, but I'd be surprised if he wanted to go there and if they had the best package. They have a package that's reasonable to your point, but that's one that's not likely. I think I'm not expecting this to happen, to be very clear, but I think if you said, okay, who is the big splash that's like the most reasonable for them to get, it's probably someone like Zion. Just because the price isn't going to be crazy, crazy high. He's got Southeast ties. Like, I can see that. Like, I'm not saying it's going to happen, but he would pair well with Trae Young. Like, that kind of move, I would bet against it happening. But that's the one big splash that I've got him quietly circling. They're not close enough to me to get into the KD war. Because, like, to trade for KD, you got to be, like, thinking you're going to win a championship. Probably. He's just at that point in his age curve where you don't want to do that if you're not ready to really win right then. So yeah, that's the one. I think it's probably more going to be modest, but I know they have this starting 5 that's locked in with 5 young guys, but there's nothing to say that they can't add. I mean, I'm one of my big things is that people have to realize there are more than 5 players that matter in each team. I know you know that, but it's a fan thing. They just want to list the starting 5. It's like, well, yeah, who's the 6th guy? There's some wiggle room there, but yeah, my sneaky all-star level splash guy would be Zion, but even then, it doesn't seem likely to me.
Yeah, with that I could see. I would imagine that just more so. Do you want to bring in Zion instead of having Jalen Johnson? That would have to. I would imagine that's kind of what it might come down to. But I don't. Ultimately, I think they'll just stick with Jalen. KD. Yep. I think they could do it. Like, I think they have the stuff to do it. But like you said, like,
they could do it. They definitely could do it. I just don't know if I would recommend it.
No, but I think if you're trading for a KD, I feel like it's because you are like a KD away from winning a championship, which the Hawks aren't there. So I wouldn't do that. So I think ultimately, yeah, they'll probably just continue, and I just continue the course, which is fine. Again, like I keep bringing it back, like just considering where they were last year, they actually have something to build to now. Because last year you had Jalen Johnson mainly, and we didn't know what's going to happen with Trae Young. But now you've got Dyson Daniels and Risa. You really have like something to build on. So I would say that really eases the pressure from needing to do anything crazy, and just continue to see these guys grow, because I think this is like a very good core for the Hawks to be excited around and to build on. As far as what they probably do, we'll see about the mid-level. I would guess, because it seems like their biggest hole right now is backup big, which won't be very hard. They'll have their options. They don't even have to wait till free agency. They could extend Capella or Nance right now. Maybe they bring back one of them, or just bring in a different big man. I kind of feel like they want to bring back Karis LeVert. You could tell me if you disagree. You could push back on any of this I'm saying, but he played really well. They could really use another combo guard like him. But yeah, they could like if they bring back like LeVert and one big, they probably still have some room to use the mid level. So yeah, they can have like a pretty like deep roster, like up through like their top 11 if they really wanted to do that.
No, I think you're right. They'd like to bring back LeVert. It's just, is there an offer out there for LeVert that they don't want to go to? Basically, that's what it comes down to with LeVert. I think both sides, from what I heard, would like to have a reunion. But if you're Karis LeVert and somebody offers you $5 extra million, you probably have to take it. It's one of those things. But yeah, I think that's a practical. The most likely player that they would quote unquote bring in at a real salary is Karis LeVert, who they already have. He just happens to be a free agent now. As far as the backup big spot, that is the one spot in the rotation that's like very empty right now. I think Capella is going to move on, if I had to guess. Nance could return, but Nance is not quite. Like, I think they want a little bit more size. So if they want to bring back Nance for cheap, they love Larry Nance as a guy in the locker room, versatile piece. But like they'll still want another big man, I think, if they did that as their primary. But like you said, it's not too hard to find relatively cheap backup center play. They can do that. So yeah, I think there'll be pinching pennies. If there's anything, pinching pennies. I think if there's anything I've noticed or known for several times, they're not going to pay the tax this year. I'd be surprised if they were to do that, which means that becomes kind of a firm line. And there's a lot of wiggle room under there, but they do care about that tax line. They haven't paid the tax in almost 20 years. So they're not going to do it. And I think that would make you somewhat limited, even if they have more weapons if they wanted to use them. It's just, if that's your dividing line, then you only have so much room.
Right. Sorry. Right. But no, I think, they just continue with building on what they've got. They have this flexibility for the first time, and I would like they're gonna try to stay as good as possible. So I would think, they're gonna just try to maximize their flexibility, like up until the tax line. Last thing, do you have any MLE guys that you think that you would like to see them target? I would guess they probably want like a much better backup wing.
Yeah, I mean, it really depends on what they do with LeVert. Like, if they bring LeVert back, it lessens the need. If LeVert doesn't come back, that is a glaring need, and they're going to need another perimeter player of some kind. I mean, no one like for the full MLE that I'm like in love with. There are names like, for instance, if they wanted to go a little bit more of an investment at backup center, they could go with like someone like Steven Adams. Like they could try to go throw the mid level or something like that at Adams if he wants to come. I don't know if he would. I'm trying to look at my list right now. Like, there's been some Ty Jerome stuff if they want to go another guard. But everybody wants Ty Jerome right now, and Cleveland might just want to keep him. So that might not, like, I don't know. There's not anybody that I'm absolutely in love with as a full mid-level guy, unless someone wants to take a discount or whatever. They could really change it up, especially if Milwaukee goes in a different direction. Maybe you go Brooke Lopez, and that gives you a different look at center. A Conley could play with him a little bit, etc. I don't know what's going to happen there, but there's no one that's screaming at me as far as mid level is concerned. I do have a bunch of names, but a lot of those guys are either like a little bit better than the mid level, or they're a little bit like where you don't want to go that far. If that makes sense, I'm not sure what your board looks like, but a lot of guys that either think, okay, they probably won't come to Atlanta, or they're not worth the $14 million a year investment. Like, it's just interesting middle ground right now.
Yeah, I haven't looked too much into it because I actually think there's a pretty good possibility they don't even use the mid-level. They reserved it and ended up using it as a trade exception to help generate an even bigger one. I think they generated like a bigger Bogdanovich one, which lasts longer.
They never, honestly, they almost never use it. And it frustrates me. There have been times when they've been sitting, $10 million under the tax line, and it's like they need another player. They didn't use the mid-level, and it's like, what are we doing here? But yeah, you're right. I mean, especially if LeVert comes back, it will not surprise me at all if they don't use it. If LeVert leaves, they're going to have to do something else to find depth. My
feeling is, there's not a lot of really strong options worth throwing that out there for someone. But I'm also, when you're looking ahead, you're going to have extended Trae, you'll have Johnson under contract, and then you got to give Dyson Daniels his extension. So I'm kind of looking at their cap sheet 2 years ahead. And when you have a mid-level on top of that, then you're starting to get kind of dangerously close to exceeding the tax again. So I think, if I had to guess, I think they'll, they wouldn't use the whole thing. Maybe they'll use it on someone, but not necessarily to like maximize their spending, but like you said, if they lose Levert or someone like they lose him or they lose one of the big men, and now you got to go after someone, okay, then you use it. I just wouldn't expect them to like maximize their long-term payroll to help. You got to prep for when Dyson Daniels' next contract kicks in. That's gonna cost a lot of money eventually. So, I think ultimately they'll bring in some depth pieces. I would expect all those deals to be like on the shorter end of things, like all these guys we just mentioned. You don't really need to commit more than 2 years to really any of them. So I think they'll just try to keep things on the shorter end and just keep their flexibility open so they're in a good spot to retain everybody beyond the next 2 seasons.
Yeah, they have a pathway to real depth if they retain their guys. But we've been saying it for years and years. They always need more offensive firepower on the perimeter. Levert helps with that, but if he's not there, they're really going to need it. What is Kobe Buff game? There's always like lower level questions that they're going to have to answer. Their draft picks, they have 2 first round picks. Rookies don't really help you in their rookie season most of the time, which is always an under discussed thing. But they're going to have to probably add, I should say, 2 more salary guys who are going to make not a ton of money, but a little bit of money, who they have to commit money to and resources to. And yeah, they're in this limbo that they've always been in, where if the thin red line of the tax is your thin red line forever, then it creates team building challenges when you start paying guys of any kind.
Right. But look, let's see, maybe I don't think they'll ever not pay the tax. They just the team's really got to be at a high level where they're like a home court advantage team at the least. And maybe that's possible in the next 3 years or so. But yeah, I think that's about everything I've got, Brad. Thanks for being on. I really appreciate you doing this. And do you have anything coming up that we should be on the lookout for?
No, thanks for having me. Nothing huge. I mean, it's just it's busy for the Hawks with this front office search on top of everything else. Locked on Hawks podcast is the number one thing there. I have a Patreon as well. It's patreon.com/BT Rowland, where I do some Hawks writing and some extra audio stuff. I cover the league off and on. I just changed outlets because one of them went away, and you know how it is. It's that time of it's the industry that we're in, but it never stops. And I'm at BT Rowland on all social platforms as well if you want to follow Hawks and non-Hawks stuff.
Well, there you go, everyone. Yeah, so you could, as Brad said, you could follow him on Twitter, Blue Sky at BT Rowland. Listen to all his stuff, almost like pretty daily, like almost daily on Locked On Hawks. And you can follow me on Twitter and Blue Sky at Yossi Goslin, as well on YouTube, all the podcast providers, all my name, Yossi Goslin. Please subscribe to Third Apron. I've got more deeper off-season previews coming out. I'm going to release the Kings tomorrow. I did the Raptors yesterday. And I'll be back tomorrow to talk Miami Heat upcoming off-season. So I will see you guys tomorrow.